I had just closed the biggest deal of my career, $15 million. After 3 nights in Tokyo where sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. There were tense meetings that left no space to even breathe, and handshakes wrapped in polite smiles that meant nothing. When my flight landed in Austin that morning, I pictured a quiet celebration, an iced coffee, a few congratulations from my team, maybe a moment to finally exhale. That is not what waited for me. The Tavern Dynamics building looked exactly the way it always did, sunlight sliding across the marble floor of the Texas lobby like nothing in the world had changed. But the second I pushed through the revolving doors, I stopped cold. Sitting right in the middle of that lobby, directly under the company's polished silver logo, were 3 black trash bags. They looked swollen and heavy, and one had torn open just enough that I could see inside, a family photo in its frame, my white ceramic mug, and the small bonsai tree I had carried back from Tokyo. 2 years earlier, its leaves had already dried out and scattered across the tile. For a few seconds, I genuinely could not process what I was looking at. A security guard I didn't recognize stood near the reception desk, his eyes fixed on anything except me. I opened my mouth to ask what was going on when the elevator chimed. Martha Hale stepped out wearing her usual calm expression, a cream colored suit, platinum hair pulled into a tight bun, heels clicking against the marble with that same unhurried rhythm. Her perfume arrived before she did, that familiar blend of authority and ice. "Welcome back, Angela," she said, as casually as if she were commenting on the weather. "We need to talk." I scanned the lobby for anyone who might explain this. Evan from finance was crossing the floor, and the moment he saw me, he froze, pretended to answer a phone call, and turned the other way. A couple of others practically ran into the elevator, their silence louder than anything they could have said. I gestured at the bags, trying to keep my voice level. "These are yours," Martha cut in. "HR packed them for you. Tavern Dynamics is restructuring, and unfortunately, your position has been eliminated." I heard every word clearly, but my brain simply refused to accept them. The air conditioning suddenly felt too cold against my skin. "Restructuring," I said. "I just brought in a $15 million contract, Murakami Freight. You signed off on the proposal yourself before I flew out." She tilted her head, and her smile never wavered, though her eyes had gone flat and cold. "That contract is impressive," she admitted, "but the company needs a different direction now. I genuinely hope you'll come to see this as an opportunity." I held her gaze. "I've given this company 6 years. I built the entire East Asia logistics strategy from the ground up. Without me, the Murakami deal wouldn't have closed this quarter. Nobody is irreplaceable," she said, glancing at her watch. "HR has already sent the termination letter to your personal email. Your building access and system credentials have been revoked. Thank you for your service, Angela." Then she turned and walked away, her perfume trailing behind her like a final signature on the whole encounter. I stood there gripping my bag strap while familiar faces drifted past, glancing at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity before quickly looking elsewhere. The guard still wouldn't meet my eyes. I crouched down and lifted the bonsai out of the torn bag, dirt smearing across my sleeve as a broken branch snapped off in my hand. It felt impossibly light, fragile, like something that had already lost whatever meaning it once had. Stepping outside, the Austin heat hit me like a solid wall, rising off the pavement and wrapping around me as I crossed toward the parking lot. My reflection caught in the glass doors behind me, a wrinkled shirt, dark circles from the overnight flight, and 3 black bags holding 6 years of my life. I paused at the top of the steps and took a long breath. In that moment of quiet humiliation, Martha's words kept replaying in my head. Nobody is irreplaceable. Maybe she believed that, but some people, when they get erased, don't simply vanish. I slipped the broken bonsai branch into my pocket and kept walking. The wind moved through the trees lining the parking lot, and the bags felt heavier with every step, though what weighed on me most wasn't their weight at all. It was the sensation of being wiped clean, as if 6 years had never actually belonged to me in the first place. I didn't know yet where I was headed or what I would do next, but I knew, with complete certainty, that this wasn't the end of the story. I stopped at the curb and looked up at the burning Austin sky, my breathing still uneven from the flight. Somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the sting of humiliation, something small flickered to life, bright enough to cut through the fog. A spark of defiance, a quiet, private promise. They were going to remember my name. If you're watching this, tell me where you're tuning in from, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had your work thrown away like garbage, treated as if it never mattered. I want to hear your story. And if you're the kind of person who loves watching quiet, underestimated people rise, who loves seeing justice reclaimed through intelligence rather than shouting, stay with me and subscribe. Because what happened after that morning changed both of our lives, mine and Martha's. When I woke the next day, sunlight had already slipped through the curtains and fallen across the wilted bonds, I sitting on my windowsill. The soil inside its pot had cracked from dryness, and dust still clung to the yellowing leaves from the day before. I didn't even remember falling asleep, only the steady rhythm of my printer running through the night, and 3 words burning themselves into my mind. Remove Carter before the Q2 board meeting. I made myself coffee. The bitter smell filled the small apartment, mixing with the scent of fresh paper and the faint mustiness drifting from the 3 trash bags still sitting in the corner like silent witnesses to execution. I sank into my chair, laptop open, the blue glow reflecting off the wooden desk. Part of me still couldn't accept what had happened. Only 24 hours earlier, I had been standing in a conference room on the 18th floor in Tokyo, signing a $15 million contract while Kenji Murakami told me, "We trust you, Miss Carter." Now I had been discarded like someone who never mattered at all. But the truth doesn't wait around for you to believe it. It just sits there, exposed and unmovable. I pulled up my backup files and combed through every page carefully. In the internal reports, the profit figures had been quietly altered. The Murakami deal had disappeared entirely from the quarterly revenue list. And in the corner of the document, Martha's digital signature gleamed like a blade that had just been wiped clean. None of this was accidental. I leaned back and closed my eyes, running through the faces from the executive floor one by one. Evan, who could never hold eye contact with anyone. Sharon in finance, who had been complaining about an upcoming restructuring 2 months earlier. And Martha, with her flawless smile and eyes that never once stopped calculating. Remove Carter, not because I had failed at my job, but because I knew too much. My hand curled into a fist, and the sting of humiliation slowly hardened into something colder and sharper. I opened a new document and titled it Project Truth. Then I began writing down every fragment I could remember the emails between Martha and a company called Kronex Global. The timeline of the Murakami signing, the doctored reports. Every line felt like drawing poison out of my own veins. I paused on one name, Kronex Global. It sounded familiar. A conglomerate known for swallowing mid-sized companies and gutting their workforce to maximize profit margins. I opened my browser and searched. Headline after headline filled the screen. Kronex was preparing to expand into smart logistics, exactly the sector where Tavern Dynamics held its dominance. The pieces fell into place with uncomfortable clarity. Martha wasn't trying to save the company. She was preparing to sell it. And my $15 million contract had just made Tavern too valuable to sell cheaply. I had unknowingly ruined her plan. I didn't know whether to feel foolish or furious. 6 years of loyalty, and I thought I had understood who she was. I once believed Martha was someone I could learn, strong, decisive, unshakable, but her strength was never about leadership. It was about control. A soft notification broke the silence. A message from Olivia, a former colleague who had left Tavern the year before. I heard what happened. Be careful with Martha. She never lets anyone leave without leaving a mark. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. Did you ever see anything connecting her to Cronex? 3 dots blinked, then stopped, then blinked again. Finally, a single line appeared. Don't text, call me. Her voice on the phone was low and steady. Olivia had worked in finance before she was let go, following a closed-door meeting she still remembered clearly. I once found out they were wiring money to an offshore account. I confronted Martha about it, and 2 days later I was gone. The official reason was workforce optimization. I gripped the phone tighter. Do you still have any proof? No, she admitted, but I know who does. Evan. He worked directly with Cronex, and he's scared. The name landed like a sudden memory. Evan, the man in the lobby the day before, eyes down, hands trembling around his phone. Maybe he knew something. Maybe he was trapped in this too. I opened my laptop and found his personal email buried in my old contacts, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. If Martha was monitoring him in any way, a message from me could put him in real danger. I deleted the draft and closed the lid. This had to be handled carefully. I walked over to the window. The first light of morning spread across the cluttered room, and outside, Austin carried on as if nothing at all had happened. I looked at the bonds, dry leaves, brittle branches, but somewhere in the trunk, a hint of green still held on. I poured a little water into the soil and set it back in the sunlight. In my mind, a plan was beginning to take shape, clear and deliberate. Martha might have erased me from the company's system, but she couldn't erase what I remembered. The meetings, the reports, the numbers only I truly understood. If they wanted to bury the truth, I would drag it back into daylight, not for revenge, but because I refused to be erased as though I had never existed. I returned to my desk and opened a new page inside Project Truth. Beneath the title, I typed, Day 2. Begin investigation. Target Martha Hale. The keys clicked steadily under my fingers, light but certain. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting my shadow across the wall. And in that shadow I saw something new, not fear, not despair, but a cold, focused calm. The kind you feel right before a negotiation, when you know you have nothing left to lose, and the other side does. The next morning, Austin was unusually gray, the sky low and heavy. I was still at my desk when I reread the line from the night before. Day 2, begin investigation, target Martha Hale. I stared at those black letters against the white screen and understood something important to figure Martha out. I had to stop thinking like her victim. I had to see myself the way she did, a variable to be calculated, contained, and removed. I opened my browser and searched her name. Martha L. Hale, Tavern Dynamics CEO, Austin, Texas. A flood of familiar images appeared. Martha speaking at a Women in Tech Leadership panel. Martha at a forum on resilience during crisis. Martha posing beside the state governor. Her expression never changed across any of them. That same half-smile. Those eyes that revealed absolutely nothing. I read through her biography. Born in Nebraska, once head of strategy at a major transport company, she'd left after a buyout and started Tavern Dynamics from a small team working out of her garage. 6 years ago, when I joined during the company's expansion into the Asian market, Martha had personally recruited me. She'd told me, I spent years standing outside the door just to earn a seat at the table. I won't let that happen to you. I had believed every word of it. Looking back now, maybe she never intended to keep others out. She just wanted to make sure she remained the only one sitting at the center of it. I added a few notes to Project Truth, Martha the perfect, leader archetype, a documented history of takeovers and cutting loose former partners, possibly repeating the same pattern now with tavern dynamics. A new search result caught my eye 3 years earlier. At a conference in Dallas, Martha had said, "Leadership isn't about holding power. It's knowing when to cut off the rotten part so the rest can survive." I read that line several times, cut off the rotten part. In her version of events, I was that rotten part. I leaned back and closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced from the afternoon before I flew to Tokyo. Martha had stopped by my desk holding a thick folder. "Don't forget, at Murakami you're representing Tavern, not yourself," she'd said. At the time, I thought it was just routine formality. Now I understood she had been quietly separating me from my own work before I'd even left the country. My phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, rough and uneasy. "Angela, it's me, Evan." I froze. "Why are you calling me?" "I shouldn't be, but you need to know. Martha's meeting with Cronex this morning. It's not a merger. They're discussing selling client data. I don't know all the specifics, but I heard your name come up. You need to be careful." "My name," she said. "If you cause trouble, there are ways to handle it. Angela, you don't understand her. Martha has a plan for everything." Before I could respond, the call ended. I sat there, phone still in my hand, his words echoing in my head. She has a plan for everything. I was no longer dealing with just a powerful woman. I was up against a machine built entirely from precision and control. I turned on my voice recorder and whispered, "Evan's call confirms Cronex and client data," before saving it. Across the city, Martha sat in her top-floor office, glass walls reflecting the entire skyline of Austin like a mirror. A cup of black coffee sat on her desk beside a folder stamped with the Cronex logo. "We need to make sure Murakami doesn't back out," the man across from her said. "If Carter contacts them, she won't," Martha replied evenly. "Angela still believes in professional ethics. She'll need time to be angry, and then she'll move on, just like the others did. And if she doesn't, we'll handle it a different way." She set down her cup and looked out at the skyline. "I once lost everything because I trusted people to play fair. I won't let that happen again." After the man left, she sat alone, the afternoon light deepening the lines around her eyes. An old photograph lay on her desk, Martha with a group of young employees, myself included, all of us smiling in front of the newly opened Tavern Dynamics building. She picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then slid it back into the drawer. What drove her wasn't pure cruelty. Something older sat buried beneath it, an old fear, the kind that convinces a person to build a wall of steel around themselves. 6 years earlier, after being pushed out of a director role at her previous company, she'd been told she was too hard, not soft enough to lead. "I learned one thing," she'd said once, "softness is what makes people break." That evening, her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "Don't forget, the old debt isn't settled, Martha." She stared at it, a flicker of unease crossing her face, then deleted it, though her hand kept trembling slightly around the phone. At the same moment, I sat at my desk rereading my notes. The pieces were coming together: Cronex, Martha, the hidden profits, and now the client data. I had no title, no position, but I had the truth, and I knew how to tell it. If Martha assumed I would stay quiet, she had forgotten one crucial thing. I had learned how to survive by watching her. I turned off the light and looked out at the city glowing orange under the street lamps. Traffic moving like rivers of light. Somewhere up in that tower, Martha was probably looking down at the same skyline, still convinced she controlled everything. She didn't know that once a story starts being rewritten, it doesn't stop. I touched the cover of Project Truth. The paper felt cool and heavier than it had the night I first printed it, as though it now carried a new chapter, Martha Hale, the woman of power and of scars. I had first met Kenji Murakami inside a conference room on the 40th floor of the Co Plaza Hotel in Tokyo. He wasn't a man who spoke often, but every word he did say carried weight. When I presented our partnership strategy, he simply nodded in silence, then said one sentence at the end, "I trust you, Carter." That single sentence had carried me through 3 days of negotiations that felt like weathering a storm. Now, seeing his name light up my phone under the heavy Austin sun, I knew this call would change everything. "Angela Carter," he said when I picked up, his voice low but clear. "I tried reaching you through your company, but it seems they don't want me speaking with you anymore." I took a breath. "I'm no longer with Tavern Dynamics. Why?" "That question is really for Martha Hale." There was a long pause on his end. "Our contract has a problem," he finally said. "Finance sent me a revised version. Your name has been removed from the responsible parties. I don't work with anyone but you. Can we meet?" I looked around my small apartment, papers scattered across the desk. "I can." That afternoon, we met at a small downtown cafe. Kenji arrived right on time, wearing a plain white shirt and carrying an old leather briefcase. He didn't look like a powerful executive so much as a strict father hiding disappointment. "Your company says you left for another position," he said after ordering coffee. "I don't believe that for a second. I was removed," I told him, meeting his eyes directly. "Not because I failed, but because I succeeded at the wrong time." He nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I understand. I've seen this happen many times. In Japan we have a saying, when a tree grows too fast, it gets cut down to keep the forest even." I gave a small, tired smile. I guess I was that tree. Kenji pulled a thin envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "This is the original contract with your signature. I kept it as part of our agreement. If Tavern wants to cut you out of this process, they'll have to start from nothing. I choose who I work with, and I choose you." I stared at the envelope, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness rise inside me. "What do you want me to do?" "Continue the project, but not under Tavern Dynamics. I'll sign directly with you." I froze. "I don't have a company." "Then start one," he said, as naturally as if starting a company were as simple as picking up a pen. "I've watched how you work. You don't need anyone's shadow over you." I sat there listening to the faint clink of a spoon against his cup, and his words landed somewhere I had avoided for years. For 6 years I had worked harder and better, always operating under someone else's banner, never once imagining I could stand on my own. I left the cafe holding that envelope, feeling as though I'd just received an order, except it hadn't come from him. It had come from myself. That night I opened my laptop and typed the words "Register LLC Texas." Each step of the process appeared on the screen: register name, address, business type. I straightened my back, fingers trembling slightly as I typed the first line: Novolink Strategies LLC. A simple name, but it felt like a door opening into a completely new world. I submitted the form, paid the fee, and when the confirmation page appeared, I smiled for the first time since being let go. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone starting from zero, using memory as her only capital. The next morning, I met the first 2 members of Novolink at a small cafe beneath my apartment building. Mia, a marketing graduate I had mentored during her internship, and Lucas, a young programmer who'd worked on Tavern's tech team. Both already knew I'd been let go, and neither asked why. They only asked, "When do we start?" "Right now," I said. We set up in an empty ground floor room in my building, small enough that we could hear the printer hum and smell the cheap coffee brewing in the corner. I began drafting the Murakami freight proposal. Mia worked on the presentation slides. Lucas built our own data system from scratch. Every keystroke sounded like a heartbeat for something new taking shape. That afternoon, an email arrived, sender, Martha Hale, subject line, regarding breach of confidentiality terms. I opened it and read every word carefully. She cited the non-compete clause in my old contract, warning that any activity involving Tavern's clients could lead to legal action. The last line was short and sharp as a blade. Don't make yourself an enemy of the company that gave you everything. I sat in silence for a while, then wrote back 2 sentences. I was never the company's enemy, but I will not stay silent while being erased. I hit send. It felt like laying the first brick of a new wall. There was no plan for revenge yet, only one certainty. If they wanted to forget me, they would have to work very hard not to see me again. In the corner of the Bonce, I still sat on the windowsill. Its driest branch had already fallen away, but near the base, a tiny new sprout was pushing through the soil. I looked at it and smiled. No one ever notices the exact moment they begin again, not until they spot a small sign of life growing out of what looked completely dead. I wasn't used to starting over at 30, too. Everything about the small room where Novolink was born felt temporary, the scrape of plastic chairs against the floor, the hum of the air conditioner, the echo of keyboards in an empty space. But underneath that fragility was something clear and solid. The energy of 3 people building something new out of the wreckage. Mia typed quickly on her laptop, reading a few lines from the presentation draft aloud. We don't just provide logistics solutions. We redesign how people move goods across the world. I listened and nodded, ambitious but honest. I wanted Novolink to feel bold, a name people would associate with reinvention rather than someone recently discarded from her old company. Lucas sat in the corner, eyes locked on a black screen filled with running code. I'm setting up our internal data system, he said. We can't let anyone else touch this network. I understood exactly what he meant. None of us believed Martha was the kind of person who let go easily. 3 days later, I met the lawyer Olivia had recommended, James O'Donnell, a man experienced in disputes between employees and large corporations. His office sat on the 2nd floor of an older building on 6th Street, filled with the scent of coffee and fresh paper. James wore a plain white shirt with no tie and spoke slowly, carrying that quiet assurance that made people trust him instantly. You didn't sign a non-compete after your termination, he asked evenly. I didn't sign anything. Just received an email notification. Then they can't enforce it. If your termination lacked proper legal cause, that clause is void. Do you have evidence pointing to another motive? I placed the Project Truth folder on his desk and turned a few pages. I do. Plans for a merger with Cronex Global, altered profit reports, and a note that says remove Carter before the Q2 meeting. James raised his eyebrows, studying the pages carefully. This could change everything. If Tavern sues you, we counter, but I doubt Martha risks an actual courtroom. She'll use quieter methods, pressure through reputation. I'm ready for that, I said. That afternoon, I went back to the Novolink office. The whiteboard on the wall was already crowded with timelines. Week 1, finalize the Murakami contract. Week 2, register our proprietary data system. In the center, I wrote another line in red marker, protect reputation. That night, I posted on LinkedIn, nothing long. Just a few short, carefully chosen paragraphs. When women are pushed out of the boardroom, they have 2 choices, stand outside in silence or build their own table. I chose mine. I never mentioned Tavern Dynamics or Martha by name, but I knew people would connect the dots. By morning, the post had been shared hundreds of times, comments pouring in from every direction. Some said things like, so inspiring, and we need more voices like yours. Others stayed quiet but had clearly read it, and I was certain Martha was one of them. At noon, a new message appeared in my inbox, an official notice from Tavern's legal department. Dear Miss Carter, we have been informed you are currently collaborating with client Murakami Freight under an independent entity. Please be reminded that the use of any data, documentation, or procedures related to Tavern Dynamics constitutes a breach of confidentiality and may result in legal action. I printed the letter, set it on my desk, and laughed quietly to myself. 3 days. Martha was still exactly herself, always striking first, before anyone else could catch their breath. I drafted a reply and attached a copy of an authorization document carrying her own signature from the previous year. According to the authorization letter dated June 14th, Mrs. Hale granted me permission to work independently with foreign clients within my scope of authority. Copy attached. I fully respect Tavern Dynamics's rights and trust the company will equally respect mine. I hit send and closed my laptop. The fear was gone, replaced by a steady, calm conviction. Martha might hold more power on paper, but I held the one weapon she never expected me to have, truth and memory. That evening, while Mia and I fine-tuned the presentation for our upcoming meeting with Murakami, my phone buzzed with a message from James. Well done, I just saw their internal response. Martha's gone quiet for now. Keep going. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the peeling paint on the low ceiling. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt exhausted. Every battle, win or lose, drains something out of you. Tired doesn't mean stopping, though. I knew her silence wasn't an ending, only the calm before the next wave. I stepped out onto the balcony, and the Austin night stretched wide in front of me, glowing with the lights of distant towers. The scent of exhaust and dry wind mixed together in the air. Inside, Lucas kept typing, and Mia was on a call with a potential partner. Novalink was alive now. I went back to my desk, opened Project Truth, and added one last line. Martha Hale temporarily in retreat. Next phase, prepare counterstrike. Outside, city lights shimmered against the glass, and in my own reflection I saw someone new. Not the woman who'd been thrown out of her company, but the one laying the first brick of her return. I knew the road ahead would be long, and that Martha wouldn't sit still. But for the first time since that morning in the lobby, I wasn't being pushed anymore. I was moving, genuinely moving on my own 2 feet. Martha never let even the smallest scratch go unanswered. I knew that much, but I didn't expect her to strike this quickly. 3 days after I sent my reply, an article appeared in the Austin Business Weekly. Former Tavern Dynamics employee accused of stealing client data to form her own company. Beneath the headline sat my photo, pulled straight from the company website, along with a short paragraph claiming that, according to unnamed internal sources, I had left the company following a dispute over international contract ownership. I read it over and over, feeling both angry and strangely amused. Internal sources, but who else could that possibly be except Martha? It was exactly her style. Not a lawsuit, just a quiet smear meant to poison public perception. Mia rushed into the office, phone in hand, her face pale. People are talking about it on LinkedIn. Some are already sharing the article. Don't read the comments. I said, my voice calmer than I expected. If people want to believe it, they will. Lucas looked up from his screen. What are you going to do? Find proof. If they're using rumors, I'll use facts. I emailed James a copy of the article, and his reply came almost instantly. Don't respond publicly. I'll trace where this came from. Meanwhile, gather everything related to the data they're claiming was stolen. I reopened my old archives. Most of my project files lived on Tavern's internal servers, but the Murakami materials had been placed on a separate temporary server, under Martha's direct instruction, the year before. I dug through my old emails and found it. Angela, keep all Murakami files on the temporary server for easier access from Tokyo. I'll take full responsibility for security. The evidence existed in her own words. I forwarded it straight to James. He called back within 10 minutes, his voice steady. Perfect, that's their first mistake, but I doubt Martha's finished. She'll have another card to play. He was right. That afternoon, Kenji called, his tone carrying an unusual hesitation. Angela, I just received an email from Tavern Dynamics. They're claiming you're no longer the legal representative for Murakami Freight. and they've asked us to halt all work with Novolink." I was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe them?" he sighed. "I trust results, not words. They sent over financial documents, but something doesn't add up. I'll forward them to you." When I opened the file, my pulse jumped. It was a revised financial report showing Tavern's revenue dropping sharply, identical in structure to the doctored figures I'd already seen buried in the Cronex merger plan. Martha was recycling the same falsified numbers, now turning them into ammunition against me. That evening, James came by the Novolink office and spread the documents across the table, his eyes sharp. "See, they don't need to actually win a case. They just need to keep you too busy defending yourself to move forward." He tapped the report. "But this proves Martha is manipulating real data. Can you verify the original file?" "Lucas can," I said. He used to have access to Tavern's system. Lucas sat down and got to work, fingers flying across the keyboard. A few minutes later, he pulled up an auto backup log. "Got it. The source file was created 3 months ago. The last editor listed is Martha Hale." James smiled. "Then this game ends sooner than I thought. But Martha wasn't finished yet." The next day, I got a message from my mother saying a woman had come by, introducing herself as a Tavern Dynamics representative. I drove over immediately. My mother met me at the door, looking puzzled. She didn't say much. She told me. "Just asked if you were all right. Then she said sometimes people have to choose between being right and surviving. I stood still, the wind stirring around me." What was her name? I think it was Martha. I couldn't focus for the rest of that day. Martha hadn't gone there to threaten my mother directly. She'd gone there to plant fear. But I wasn't the same person she had fired weeks earlier. I turned on my voice recorder and spoke quietly into it. Day 28, Martha Hale appeared outside work boundaries. She's afraid. That evening, I sat with my mother in the kitchen while she poured tea, her voice calm. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Sometimes I want to just let it go. But if I stay silent, I become just like them." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes deep and steady. "When your father left, I didn't fight him, but I never let him forget I existed. Sometimes resistance doesn't need noise. You just have to stand firm, and they'll step back on their own." I stayed quiet, the way she always had a talent for making me understand things without needing to explain them fully. I held her hand and whispered thanks. That night, alone in my room, the outside light casting faint lines across the glass, I noticed the Project Truth folder on my desk had grown thicker, its pages stacking like layers of a wave. I opened my laptop and began drafting a report I wasn't ready to send yet, just to have it prepared. The connection between Tavern Dynamics and Cronex Global. Date, the manipulation analysis. As I typed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop now, Angela. Don't dig deeper. There are things you don't want to know." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't delete it. I saved it into a folder labeled Threats, then kept typing. Outside, the wind picked up, and the bonsai on the windowsill trembled slightly, a few new leaves drifting onto the desk. I picked them up and held them in my palms, soft, fragile, but still carrying the faint smell of life. I thought about Martha, about the fear driving her need for control, and about myself, the woman who had once been just as afraid, but was slowly learning to turn that fear into strength. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, I saved the draft and whispered to myself, "If you want a war, Martha, I'll fight, but with truth." In that quiet room, with only the wind and the soft hum of the fan for company, I understood that I had crossed into a new phase. I was no longer the victim. I was the opponent, and somewhere across the city, I was certain Martha knew it too. 3 weeks passed and everything seemed calm, but I knew that kind of calm was a lie, the quiet before the storm. Novolink was gaining traction, signing 2 small contracts with local firms, and Murakami Freight kept their word, transferring the first payment of $1, $2 million for the pilot phase. Mia and Lucas worked almost nonstop, and so did I. though part of my mind stayed elsewhere. Martha hadn't made her next move yet, and that worried me far more than when he had actually attacked. On a Thursday night, James called, his voice stripped of its usual calm. "Angela, I just got word Tavern is preparing to file an official lawsuit." I closed my eyes. "What's the charge?" "Intellectual property infringement. They're claiming Novalink's data platform was copied from Tavern Dynamics." A dry laugh escaped me. Martha was patient, and now she was striking at the very technology I had built for her company in the first place. "You need to be ready," James said. "If this goes public, the press will circle again. I'll try to stall it, but you need proof that Novalink was built entirely from scratch." I hung up and turned to Lucas. "We need every system record from the very first day you wrote code." He looked at me, worried. "You think they'll fake evidence. I don't think. I know they will." We stayed up the entire night. Lucas restored our original source code, locked the timestamps, and backed everything up across 3 independent servers. I archived every technical exchange and design draft we had. By morning, our eyes were rimmed, but we had a complete record proving Novalink's system belonged entirely to us. 3 days later, the lawsuit went public, and my name flooded the headlines again. Online, people split into 2 camps, one calling me a traitor, the other calling me a woman who refused to bow. I didn't read the comments, but the headlines said enough. Day to war. Tavern Dynamics sues former employee for tech theft. Kenji called that afternoon, his voice calm and deliberate. "Angela, if you need to, we can pause the contract until this clears up." I understood he was protecting his own company, and I respected that. "No need," I told him. "I won't let Martha win through fear." Across the city, Martha sat in a meeting with her legal team, the room buzzing with charts and binders and long presentations. She sat still, tapping her fingers lightly against the table. "We don't need an absolute win," she said finally. "We just need Carter exhausted, broke, and out of patience." A young man beside her hesitated. "She's getting a lot of public support. What if sentiment turns against us?" Martha smiled faintly. "The public forgets fast. They prefer a fall from grace over a comeback." But one person in that room stayed silent. Naomi, the head of communications, who had once worked closely with me. When the meeting ended, she sent me a single text: "Be careful. Some on the board are beginning to doubt Martha. Don't react yet." I stared at the message, caught somewhere between hope and suspicion, unsure whether Naomi was helping me or testing me. Either way, I stayed quiet, exactly as she'd suggested. The next 3 weeks blurred together. James, Lucas, and I worked around the clock preparing our counter-suit, while Mia dropped all her marketing plans to help gather evidence. Meanwhile, Tavern flooded the media with anonymous interviews, leaks, and so-called confidential documents. One night, Naomi called, her voice low, fast, and urgent. "I don't have much time. Tomorrow they're releasing their technical proof, a data file showing Novalink's code matches Tavern's." "That's impossible," I said. "Lucas wrote everything from scratch. They got hold of an old Tavern system copy," she said. "They're embedding Novalink's code into it and altering the timestamps to make it look like you stole it." I went cold. "Naomi, you're taking a real risk telling me this." "I know," she said, "but I've seen how you work. You don't deserve to be buried like this." She hung up, leaving me sitting in silence. I turned to Lucas and Mia. "We need to move before they do. If they're releasing this tomorrow, we release tonight." We drafted a statement with every technical log and piece of legal proof attached. James reviewed it, then called a journalist he trusted. "Publish at 10 p.m., he said, before Tavern can make their move. When the article, "The Truth Behind the Tavern, Novalink Lawsuit," went live, social media erupted. Every log, every source file, every email proved I hadn't stolen a single thing. More importantly, the evidence exposed Tavern's attempt to manufacture false proof. By the next morning, their planned article never appeared at all. Inside Tavern's office, Martha read the news with an unreadable expression, though her hands tightened around the paper. A junior assistant entered quietly. "The board wants an explanation," he said. "I know," she replied. "They'll understand. I only did what was necessary to protect this company." But deep down, she knew something was starting to crack, and on my side of the city, I knew it too. That afternoon, Naomi sent one final text. "She's lost the board's trust. Be ready, Angela. The game's turning." I stared at the screen, feeling months of tension begin to lift. But I didn't celebrate. I knew this wasn't over yet. When someone like Martha gets cornered, they don't collapse, they strike back. I shut off my monitor and looked out the window. The city glowed red under the setting sun, still except for the distant hum of traffic. I understood then that the next phase wasn't going to be about defense anymore. I had survived her opening attacks. Now it was time to rise and reclaim what belonged to me, not just my name, but justice itself. My phone rang early the next morning. James's voice was calm but edged with urgency. "Angela, you should head to the Tavern building today. The board called an emergency session. I just heard Martha's going to be questioned publicly." I was quiet for a few seconds before asking, "Am I invited?" "No," he admitted, "but you should be there. Stay outside, observe. Trust me, they'll mention your name." I wasn't sure I actually wanted to watch Martha fall in front of me. Part of me still remembered she was the one who gave me my very first chance. But then I thought of the trash bags, the humiliation, her cold words in that email. "Don't make yourself an enemy of the company that gave you everything." No. I couldn't afford to soften now. The Tavern Dynamics building came into view after the turn, its glass walls catching the midday sun. I parked across the street, watching through the trees as people in suits hurried past, phones pressed against their ears. The air felt like the calm before a storm. I stood outside unnoticed, watching everything unfold. Martha walked through the main lobby, her posture straight, her face calm to the point of arrogance. She wore the same gray suit, her silver watch catching the light as she paused briefly in front of a mirror to adjust her assistant's tie before stepping into the elevator. About an hour later, board members began filing out, their expressions tense. Martha was the last to leave. This time she wasn't walking quickly. Her shoulders had slouched slightly, her hand clutching her briefcase tighter than before. Under the cold white lights of the lobby, I saw something I had never once seen on her face: fatigue. James called at that exact moment. "They've suspended Martha. It's temporary, but it's over." I didn't say anything at first. "Angela, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said softly, "just not sure I believe it yet." That afternoon Naomi texted me, "I left Tavern today. Thank you for not staying silent. Without you, no one would have known the truth." I stared at that message for a long time. Victory didn't feel the way I had imagined it would. There was no cheering, no wave of satisfaction, just a quiet emptiness, the kind you feel after a storm passes, when the house is still standing, but the yard is covered in debris. 3 days later, I received an email from Lyra Grant, chairwoman of Tavern's board. "We'd like to meet and discuss a possible collaboration in a new capacity." I read it twice, unsure I was seeing it correctly. I agreed to meet at a downtown hotel, and James came with me. In the small meeting room, Lyra rose as I walked in, a woman around 60, silver, streaked hair, her voice calm but commanding. 2 other directors sat beside her, faces I had only ever glimpsed from meetings I was never invited to join. "Mrs. Carter," Lyra began, "we know what happened to you was unfair. We also know Martha overstepped her authority on many decisions. You've shown real resilience and rare capability. We'd like to offer you two options. I stayed silent. First, she said, return to Tavern Dynamics as Executive Director of International Accounts, reporting directly to the board, no intermediaries. I raised an eyebrow. And the second? Lyra continued with a small smile, the board is interested in Novolink. If you agree, we'd like to purchase a majority stake in exchange for a substantial sum, along with a 3-year collaboration contract. I glanced at James. He gave a small nod, signaling me to keep listening. Lyra leaned back, her eyes steady. We understand if you'd rather stay independent, but we also know the world isn't kind to those who go it alone. Consider this a chance to define success entirely on your own terms. I left the hotel at dusk, the wind strong enough to shake the trees lining the boulevard. Walking down the sidewalk, my thoughts churned. Return or sell, both options tempted me, and both felt like traps. If I returned, I'd gain real power, but under the same roof that had once thrown me out. If I sold Novolink, I'd be financially set, but I'd lose the soul of everything I'd built through sleepless nights and sheer will. I stopped in front of a small cafe. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face tired, but no longer trembling in my eyes. I sat down and opened my notebook. On the very first page of Project Truth, I had once written that this wasn't just about surviving. It was about being seen, and I realized neither of Lyra's offers would actually let that happen. One was simply a seat back at the old table. The other was absorption into an entirely different system. I closed the notebook, pulled out my phone, and texted James, I'm drafting a third proposal. He replied almost instantly, sounds interesting, tell me more, tomorrow. I wrote back. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I wrote nonstop, laying out a plan for Novolink to partner with Tavern while keeping full independence, with me serving as strategic advisor to the board, helping restructure their entire client division, not a return, but a rise to equal ground. When I finally finished, I looked out the window at the city glowing bright, every lit window like a small flame against the dark. I thought about Martha, not knowing where she was or what she was thinking. Maybe she was sitting in her high-rise apartment, staring into a darkness just like mine. In some strange way, we were still alike, neither of us willing to be forgotten. I whispered to myself tomorrow, I'll reclaim what they tried to throw away, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been called the broken part of the machine. On the table, the bonds. I stood steady under the lamp's glow, its young branches reaching upward, stronger than I had ever expected them to grow. The next morning, the Austin air carried a light mist. I woke early, put on a simple white shirt, tied my hair back, and slipped into the same black shoes I always wore, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself exactly who I was. The woman who once walked through the tavern lobby carrying 3 trash bags was the same woman who would walk in today carrying her own proposal instead. James was waiting at the hotel entrance where the meeting would happen, a cup of coffee in his hand, his smile brief and his eyes still weary. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the day they threw me out." I answered, steady despite the quiet in my voice. We walked into the meeting room on the 12th floor, where Lyra and 2 other board members were already waiting. Martha wasn't there. Her chair sat empty, though a small nameplate still remained on the table, a faint trace of someone who had once held real power in that room. Lyra greeted me with a polite smile. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I didn't come to choose between your 2 offers," I said, setting the dossier on the table. "I came to present a third option." James opened the file and handed copies around the room. My voice stayed even and clear as I began. Novolink will not be sold, and I will not return to Tavern Dynamics as an employee. Instead, I'm proposing a parallel partnership. Novolink becomes an independent strategic partner, tasked with rebuilding Tavern's international client systems over the next 6 months. All data, contracts, and project control remain with Novolink, while Tavern receives a percentage of the reactivated. Contract revenue, one director frowned. You want operational control without actually belonging to us. I don't want control for its own sake, I replied. I want to prove Tavern can grow if it's willing to break from its old model. I'm not asking for a job. I'm offering you a way forward. The room fell silent. I held their gaze steadier than I had ever felt in that building. Lyra flipped through the pages, pausing on my closing line. The future of a company doesn't belong to those who cling to power. It belongs to those who dare to rebuild it. You wrote this, she asked. I only wrote what Martha once taught me. I said, I think she just forgot what it meant. The comment landed like a stone dropped into still water. No one spoke for a long moment. Lyra closed the folder. We'll need time to review this, she said. But know this. What you've presented is exactly the approach this company has needed for a long time. I smiled. I'll wait. 3 days later, an official decision arrived. The board had approved the partnership. Novolink became Tavern Dynamics' global strategic partner, and I, as CEO of Novolink, was granted authority to lead the 6-month client restructuring. The announcement carefully avoided the word win, but everyone who read it understood exactly who now stood taller. The news spread quickly, with the press calling it an unprecedented deal between a former employee and her old corporation. Coverage shifted from skepticism to genuine admiration. One outlet wrote that I had done what many people only dare to imagine, turned a dismissal into the beginning of an entirely new empire. I read that story sitting in my new office, a small, bright room on a floor I used to look up at every single day from below. On my desk sat my mother's bonsai, tucked into its usual corner, its new shoots thicker and greener than ever. That afternoon, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was an old photograph, me and Martha, standing together at the very first Murakami contract signing. On the back, a single handwritten line read, "Do not let hatred dim your light." I studied the handwriting for a long time, the slant, the neatness, unmistakably Martha's. I didn't know where she was. Maybe out of town, maybe watching quietly from somewhere far away. For the first time, I felt no anger toward her at all, only a strange sense of gratitude, because without her, I might never have discovered how strong I could be standing entirely on my own. 2 months later, Novolink closed its first major project. The new system ran smoothly, clients returned, and revenue climbed by nearly 40%. Lyra congratulated us and suggested expanding into Europe. I agreed, but this time as an equal partner, not as someone reporting upward. That night I sat alone in the office, the city spreading out beyond the windows like a galaxy of scattered lights. I opened my laptop and typed the final line into Project Truth. 1 year ago, I stood in the company lobby holding 3 trash bags, believing my life was over. It was only the first day of a completely different journey. People can remove your name from a list, but they cannot remove the value you created. The final truth needs no proof. It only needs to survive. I closed the laptop and looked at my reflection in the glass. I no longer saw the woman who had been dismissed, or the so-called traitor from the headlines. I saw someone who had rewritten her own story. I smiled and whispered, sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone fall. It's making them see you still standing there, steady, impossible to forget. Then I turned off the lights, leaving only the window's glow falling across the bonsai, a small emblem of survival, its newest shoot tilting gently in the breeze, as if nodding in quiet agreement, and I knew, in that moment, that everything that needed to be said had finally been said.